All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome back to another Learning Tech Talks, where we are living at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. Really quick update before we get into the conversation. For those of you who haven't been following some of the stuff, I've made some changes to my community and all this stuff. So the communities know more. If you're not following me on Substack, I would encourage you to do that. You can find my content on YouTube because my website I've changed up. So anyway, lots of changes. If you have specifics, the number of messages I've been getting from people going, hey, did you know this? This isn't working. I didn't see this. So feel free to reach out and ask. But today I'm joined by Pete Sena, and he is the founder of Digital Surgeons. And we're going to have, based on our backstage conversation, we're going to have the conversation that we did not plan for, but that I actually think is extremely needed. So we're going to be talking about really just acknowledging the state of things in the world right now, where in many ways it feels like easy things are extremely hard right now. And there's just an air of, I don't know if it's tension or challenge or whatever that is, but then focus on an inspirational note of how do we use our creativity to push us forward? And how can we do that in a world that's changing a million miles an hour, and AI seems to be reinventing everything by the hour, and it can just feel like an impossible task. So Pete, first of all, thank you so much for joining me and for being comfortable and just coming on and having just this organic conversation with me about this. You are extremely qualified to have it with me, that's for sure.
I appreciate that. It's good to be here. It sort of feels right now like diapers and dumpster fires is sort of the thing that I'm thinking a lot about this week.
Maybe that will be the title of this episode, just diapers and dumpster fires, because that's a pretty accurate state. I mean, I got 7 kids, and they're
7 kids. God bless you. How do you have time for
that? That's a question I get a lot, and that's not for this podcast. So anyway, but yeah, no, I'm looking forward to this. For those who are not familiar with you and haven't had the wonderful chance I have to get to know you, a little bit of your background.
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Pete Sena. I'm a lot of things. I'm a lot to handle, as my wife would say. So I grew up on the East Coast in a state called Connecticut. I'm actually dialing in from New Haven, Connecticut on my tech campus here. And my background's in design.
Are you from Connecticut? Like, is that your origins?
Yeah,
oh,
born and raised.
Okay. That's cool. I worked for a company in Wallingford for a pretty long period of time, which I think a lot of people even in Connecticut don't know.
Somebody I know?
Is, but Source Medical was the company. I was there for quite a while. So
nice. Yeah. Haven't heard of them, but there's a lot of sleepers in Connecticut that are doing big things.
There are.
For sure. So just a little bit about me. So I'm I was a child of the 80s. So, video games, toxic masculinity, crazy action movies, and tech and design. I started writing code when I was a kid. Was a really introverted, nerdy kid, and I just was fascinated with software and code and computers, and which led on to the internet and all that stuff.
It was a really funny time based on the time period. It's very similar to mine. It was a weird time to grow up, don't you think? It was like this weird age of digital emergence that was kind of coming out.
Yeah, I actually think there's a ton of parallels to my childhood, and I had a great childhood. I'm really grateful for my family and the privilege that I had. There's a lot of parallels to when I was growing up to right now, where it's like every week something new is coming out. Now, obviously, then it was like broadband internet and things like that, and it was like every year something new would come out. Nowadays, it's like every day something new comes out with all this AI crap. Yeah. But that's just a little bit about my background. And then from there, just fell in love with design, fell in love with creativity, and just how I believe that creativity can solve all problems. Maybe it's a crazy belief of the world, but it's proved me right in a lot of ways with that. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. And then I started my first company actually in my UConn dorm room, University of Connecticut. And that was basically at a time when you could write some code, push some pixels, and make awesome stuff happen on the internet. And
And
that
it was new. It was relatively new. If you were
was
doing
super
it,
new.
it's not like everybody and their mother had a creative business where they were doing that.
Yeah. Who would have thought that making crazy MySpace pages could turn into working with some of the biggest brands in the world? Yeah, thank you very much, web programming.
Tom. Well,
Yeah,
you can thank Tom, the original. Do you remember? Do you remember MySpace? Tom.
absolutely. He
Everybody
was
was
in my
friends
top
with
8.
Tom. Yeah. Oh, that is so funny. It's interesting because I've had multiple conversations. Not all of them have been released. So some of them have been pre-recorded. But your story, there's something similar that threads through that, which is this continued disruption of this misconception that people who thrive around technology are left-brained, very process-oriented, that kind of thinker. There's a stereotype that kind of goes along with tech. And the more I explore the landscape of this and talk to folks, creatives find really unique ways to do crazy stuff with technology. And it's, to me, just completely blowing apart the stereotype of people who will be successful around tech look or sound like this. And it's like, nope, just not
Yeah.
even remotely true.
Yeah, and just a fun fact. So, like, one of my back in the day, I used to hire a lot of engineers. Now
Okay.
we've got great people that take care of that. But when I was sort of in the weeds and doing all that, I would always look for what I would call the creativity test with engineers and tech
Okay.
people. And what that basically is, just in short, is I would look for their interests. And what I found is a strong correlation between the more eclectic the interests of an engineer, the more talented they were as an engineer. And what I found is that the greatest engineers are actually generally pretty lazy. And what I mean by lazy is that they don't like to do
They
trivial
don't like to
or
waste.
yeah,
Yeah.
they
They
don't
don't
like
like
to
to waste
right?
time.
So what I found is like some of my favorite friends that are just like world-class engineers at FANG companies or transforming the blockchain or whatever my cool engineering friends are doing now is like they all have this thing in common where some of them are like crazy at music and they're really musically inclined. I find there's a strong correlation to music and strong engineers. I find there's a strong correlation to creativity and strong engineers. So I find that like if you only think of technology as this like linear thing, like input drives output, I think it's a very linear way to look at the world. And one of my favorite quotes is a Ray Kurzweil quote, obviously the super futurist, and he talks about if you think of things in linear order, you're only going to get linear results. If you think of things in
Yep.
exponential kind of computation, you can get exponential results. And it sounds a little bit trite, but like what I'm finding is that just underscores what you said, which is like the more creative you are, the more the possibilities unveil themselves, and the more you can kind of bend light around the corner and capture lightning in a bottle in a way. I think that not every person who follows the 1, 2, 3, 4 status quo is able to do.
No, and I think that's it's funny you bring up the music thing because Peter Schroeder is a gentleman who I talked to recently, and he was a DJ. He got into music, he got into the music industry, and then he decided to build a telecom company to disrupt things. But again, it was one of these things where we talked about the fact that in many ways technology is merely a blank canvas.
Oh yeah.
And I think sometimes that's where it actually requires creativity to do interesting things with it, because otherwise it's very boring. It's very not helpful if you don't actually have the creativity to, like you said, look around corners and go, well, what if we could do this? Or if you're not fueled by the frustration of this really trivial thing bothers the heck out of me.
Yeah.
Why do I have to deal with this? I shouldn't have to deal with that. I just want to figure out how to not have to deal with that anymore. And technology can be a way to go, well, I can bend this and mold it in a way that like, ta-da, like we fixed it. And you go, great. Now I can go back to doing things that I actually enjoy doing versus this stuff that's been hampering my frustration.
Yeah, it's funny. The one thing that I keep being reminded of, especially when I talk about diapers and dumpster fires, which I'm sure we're going to come back to, is that like YouTube meme thing that's like fuck around and find out, fuck around and find out. It's like my entire life as a creative technologist and as a builder or whatever label you want to put on me is all about fuck around and find out. It's just like experimentation creates extraordinary outcomes. And it's that tinkering and that, go like hacker or tinkerer or whatever that ultimately like unlocks that crazy potential. So Sorry, I'm coughing in your ear. It's like, I feel like the lingering cough that just will not disappear. Thank you, East Coast cold and flu season.
Yeah, I was gonna say the lingering cough of the last 3 years.
Yeah. This episode is sponsored by Dayquil. Like, let's go.
But so I want to talk about this because I think it was both therapeutic for the two of us to acknowledge this, but I think it's also some of the themes of this is that we talked about the fact that there is just this air right now of almost, I don't want to say, I don't know how to describe what it is, but almost just this frustration of simple things feel really hard. There's so much uncertainty with everything that's going on that it can feel like, good grief, is what I'm doing today even going to matter tomorrow type of a thing? I mean, what is your description of this? Because we both had this moment of, wait, you feel that way right now? I feel that way too right now. And I'm seeing it all around.
Yeah. My mystical friends would probably say this is like some Mercury retrograde type thing. But I legit feel like sometimes just nothing works, right? Like, I got up this morning and the GPS in my overpriced computer on wheels didn't work. And, I was cursing Elon's name in vain. And then it's like my YouTube got suspended for no random reason. So it's like, I just feel like there's some days where like nothing goes your way. And I think at the end of the day, like, you and I were nerding out about this a little bit, but I think what it really comes down to is just this concept of resilience, which is such a buzzword, but really, like, let's strip away the buzzword and like get to it. Like, what does it really mean? It's like, you're going to get knocked on your ass no matter what you do, whether it's, your personal life.
It's an inevitability.
Yeah. Like, you are going to get knocked on your ass by something that whether you expect it or you don't expect it, it's coming for you. And what matters most is like what you do next. Right. So, you can wallow in it, you can cry about it, you can get upset about it, but ultimately, like, what are you going to do about it? Right. And that's what you and I were talking a lot about, is like this idea of like, it's okay to admit to the world that like, you don't want to get up and go run your company today. Like, it doesn't mean that you want to like, hang up your gloves and give up on entrepreneurship. It's like, it means that you're having a tough day. And like, I think we as entrepreneurs, especially as men, right? I think as men, there's this like weird thing. And I was reading some.
We're never supposed to acknowledge that. Like, we're not supposed to acknowledge that. I just don't want to get out of bed today.
Yeah, 100%. And it's
I just don't want to get out of bed. And it doesn't mean I want to quit and I want to throw in the towel on life. It just means I don't want to get out of bed today because it just feels like garbage.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that like nobody wants to watch a movie where the person loses every time, right? But people do want to watch the movie where they see the underdog or the guy that's the loser becomes the winner, right? And it's like, there's this idea of like twists of fate, right? So I think for me, like, you and I were talking about this a lot, is like, the world's in a really tough place right now.
It is.
And I think that, again, not to make light of really challenging situations, but I'm trying to bring some levity to our conversation, right? There's just so many atrocities happening in the world, and we're not going to cover those today because I know we're not going to go there. But I think what I would say is this hyper connected, hyper dopamine loop, this infinite, like infinity pools that we live in, whether it's through news cycles or Instagram or whatever it is, I would argue this TikTokification of the world has actually made us more depressed, has made us more scared.
Well, the data shows that it has.
Of course.
It has overstimulated us to a point where we've flooded our brains with so much dopamine, and we've become so dependent on this, and we become, as you said, hyper connected to a point where there's so much outside of our control that is constantly hitting us.
Yeah.
That it does lead to you feeling like, what am I even doing anymore?
Yeah. And it's tough too, because what I would say, like, especially with the hype cycle that's happening right now, it's like, if we take a step back for a moment and we look at like second order consequences, right? So COVID happened, some companies got eradicated and put out of business. Some companies had their best years ever, and now with this like hyper compression of innovation that happened, where people just had to like grow 7 years in 3 months, right? That was a lot for people. And I think that the shifting behaviors, the loneliness that it brought about, all these other things that I can go on and on about, that was a hyper compression. And
Yeah.
I don't think people have still fully recovered from it. There's a lot of data that's coming out now talking about, the percentage of people that, have like brain effects as a result
Mhm.
of COVID or other related things. And again, this is not me trying to get on a propaganda machine, but rather to say like
No.
all that happened. And now we're in this world where this AI thing happened, right? And
Yeah, we got hit back to back.
yeah, we got hit back to back. And I
Big
think
time.
the AI thing is crazy because, as for myself, just being vulnerable for you and the audience is like, I spent the past 2 months building new innovations to get ahead of the curve. And I like to think me and my teams and my companies were ahead of the curve. And then Sid Altman gets on stage and goes like, ta-da. And half the shit I just spent thousands of dollars and energy and effort doing got wiped out in one dev day event,
Yeah.
right? That's like on
Yeah. And
YouTube.
I'm not laughing at your situation. I'm laughing at the disheartening nature of that's in many ways what I think a lot of people are wrestling with, myself included sometimes, where you just go, everything I've poured into for this in a matter of minutes,
Yeah.
or like you said, one product announcement, you're like,
Yeah.
that's it? Like, that's it? It's gone obsolescence already? How does that happen in the blink of an eye? And that can knock the
It can
wind
take
out
a
of
toll on your
anybody.
mental health. I mean, like
Oh, it knocks the wind clean out of you.
I have friends of mine that have spent 20, 30 years building different types of businesses that are realistically on the verge of extinction. You know, travel agents, financial planners, many of these types of roles that, are really needed are completely being displaced now. And again,
Right.
don't get me, into the whole kind of like AI is going to take everyone's job. But like in all seriousness, what I would say is it's transition and change is hard, no matter
Yeah.
what that transition and change is, whether it's, your life is changing now because you've become a parent or because um, other hardships have faced you or whatever. I think there's this interesting thing that's happening right now with a lot of my entrepreneur friends where all of us now are really excited about boring businesses. And I think the reason we're excited about boring businesses is they're like, oh, cool, like an ATM machine, like people still use those things. Like I'm not personally one of the people that's jumping at that, but it's like I have friends of mine who have made a ton of money buying ATM machines and installing them in dry cleaners and, and little bodegas.
Yeah.
And it's like to think that we're thinking about installing ATM machines that dispense paper money in a world that's going towards the blockchain and fintech and
Right. Where you're going to
digital
be
money.
a bank and have your own.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
but it's interesting because it's those boring businesses right now that cash flow quickly, that have margin, that, when Sam Altman decides to drop his latest, magic or new innovation, it doesn't like wipe you out in a second. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and not to go into the like off on a
Well, no, but
diatribe,
it's interesting watching. It's interesting watching because I don't know. The book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon says, he's like, we think things are new, but they're really not. Like nothing's really new under the sun.
no.
And it is one of these things where it's cyclical in nature, and watching things. It's interesting hearing you say that about entrepreneurs who are getting excited about old things.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I see some of that same thing happening on a societal level where people are re-engaging back with things that were really compelling that we thought were outdated 10 years ago, but they are cool now because it's like, well, wow, there's something classic and wonderful and beautiful about this, and people are gravitating towards these things that maybe a few years ago would have been, why wouldn't you, why on earth would you ever be involved in that type of a thing? And it's really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it's like, the bigger the problem that you solve, the more you get rewarded for it. So that like that's the thing that like I think a lot about. And it's like if you can bring a solution to someone that is not technical,
Yeah.
it might be the like 5-year, 10-year-old technology that someone like you and I is like, that's like super old school. But like, if all of a sudden someone feels like how it transforms their world, they're all in, right?
Yeah.
And if everybody's chasing the new shiny AI widget right now, and you're going in and just figuring out a simple way for someone to, digitize their receipts, right? We've had
Yep.
OCR technology for north of a decade, right? But like,
Yeah.
go to like a local small business that's like doing okay or doing well, and they've got like a receipt book or whatever, and like that one little change that you and I
could radically transform, right? That we could do in a heartbeat could
Yeah.
radically transform their entire business.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, you and I could rig that up in Zapier or Airtable in like 15 seconds, right? Without a line of code. But then that could save them, 30 hours a week, in which case
Yep.
they'll pay almost whatever they can afford to
Yeah.
solve that problem. So it's interesting. It's what I would say though, is just going back to the thing about, diapers and dumpster fires is like, shit happens. And I think we just have to figure out how we're going to recover from it and just keep going. I think resilience and tenacity is something that's going to set apart the people who prevail versus the people who perish. And that's just going to be my thing. What I'm leaning into a lot more now with my friends and my relationships is realizing, like, what can I learn from those who continue to recover and keep going forward? And like,
Yeah.
what are their lessons? Like, I think you just quoted a Bible reference, I think just a few moments ago. And it's actually an interesting inspiration, because while I wouldn't consider myself super religious, there's probably a gazillion maxims and lessons that you can learn if you just ask ChatGPT about the Bible, right? It's like, what can I learn about the most popular Bible Psalms that can help me lead better in 2023? Like, I'd be willing to bet with the right structured prompt, ChatGPT is going to give you some pretty cool, useful stuff there that, who knows, could make the next faceless YouTube channel that makes a bunch of money.
Well, and what's funny about it is I was in a conversation recently where somebody asked me, what is kind of the number one book you're using to try and navigate the current space? And I said, it's a 4,000-year-old text, because of some of the things that are in there, that it's like, well, there's some timeless wisdom that you can pull through from this that goes, yeah, what we're dealing with on the AI age in some ways is different and new. But in many ways, it's like you said in the very beginning, we grew up in the 80s and the 90s when the internet was a brand new thing and the whole world changed. I mean, I still remember the days where people were wondering, like, is the internet really a thing? Is this really ever going to go anywhere?
No one's going to buy
What's a
anything online.
website? No business is ever going to make a website. That is ridiculous. The days of brick and mortar, and granted, there was more of a timeline associated with it. I think that's some of the fatigue people are feeling, is the fact that it's like, good grief, if you didn't do it by next week, you're already behind. But we've been through this before. I've seen the patterns of this whole thing, even in my short lifetime, play out in cycles already. And in some ways, while that can feel exhausting, in many ways, I find that inspiring, because it does help you go, we've been through this before.
Yeah.
We've gone through this
for sure.
And we will adapt and we will charter forward, even though right now it may feel like, I don't see how that's going to happen. And it's like, you know what? That's okay. So just keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep stepping forward, because that's the only way through, is to just keep walking. Otherwise, you're just going to sit in the sludge.
No, I love that. And one of the things I got me thinking about is, I really want to meet the head of business development for whoever got a Bible in every hotel in the world. Because I feel like no matter where I've ever been, I've been to a lot of different countries, and there's always a Bible in the end table next to the bed. And it's like, it's just super interesting. No matter what chain I'm in, there's always a Bible there. And I just find that I want to meet that salesperson back in the day that figured that out, because that's probably one hell of a way to scale, right? Is like, if you can get your teachings thousands of years later, just in every damn hotel, from from the W to the Ritz-Carlton,
Yeah. So on this lines, because we've talked a little bit about the current state, and I think, the other thing that I think can be healing or just helpful in these times is even acknowledging this. I think sometimes there is this pressure to seem like I've got it all figured out. I've got all the, I don't feel this way. I'm keep pushing forward. And I think social media has exacerbated that because it's the highlight reel of everyone's life. So you'll get depressed looking at anybody's social media because you look at it and go, wow, they've solved every problem in the world and their life is wonderful 24/7 and mine isn't. But I think at the same time, it's, how acknowledging that can be extremely helpful. And I think, we both from this conversation have acknowledged the fact, yeah, it's a tough time. Things are changing. What are some of the things that you personally are seeing? You shared some of the stuff with the entrepreneurial things. You shared your story of like how something you'd worked so hard at evaporated overnight. Any other things that when you think about the diapers and dumpster fires that you see people just wrestling with right now, contributing to kind of some of that? And then I want to transition to what we can do about it and how creativity can actually be a powerful path through it.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting is like, if you look at, take like someone like a Logan Paul or a Dan Blazarian, these people that are like private jets and like parties and all the crazy cool stuff. As viral and successful and as much that they've been able to kind of like move the needle for their personal brands, it's the sort of Kardashians that have really figured out that authenticity behind like, let's show you the good and bad parts of our life. And people just feed on that information. Right. So like what I think is interesting is like looking at the creators today that are performing the best, whether it's like the young creator that just started a YouTube channel or, the like creators that we see on LinkedIn or whatever network you want to pick. There is, I think, a sense where people, people want to see the real now. I think people don't want to just see the private jet moments. I think people want to see the struggle. They want to see that someone is human and that they're not this sort of infallible kind of like perfect demigod, which I don't think anybody is, right? So I think that got me thinking when you said that just a minute ago, I was like, all right, what is it that can be most useful for people? And I think that there's this like sensationalism that I think people have really bought into for a bit. And I think what's interesting now is I'm particularly inspired now by the power of personal brand. It's one of the reasons why, I'm joining you today and starting to do more of these things. Is I was a shy, introverted kid coming up, and I worked with some incredible companies and was always the quiet person that never got the spotlight. What I'm realizing today in the attention economy and the distraction economy, time and attention are the currency that drives brands forward today. And I think that the more that you can build a distinct point of view that people subscribe to, the more that you can build, in some cases, a multi-million-dollar successful business. I mentioned like Logan Paul as an example, which I don't want to give him any more shine than he already gets, but like, look at Gatorade, right? Look at just the cool, powerful, transformative story of Gatorade, right? And then look at Prime Energy and just how quickly in such a short period of time, back to hyper compression, that brand almost has the same valuation as Gatorade, which has spent billions of dollars building that brand over 20, 30 plus years, I guess.
So, and the money that's gone into it to get it into sports and in front of every single person and all these other things. And, like you said, Prime Energy's just done that overnight by comparison.
And it's literally garbage in a bottle, right? Like and I'm not trying to like, I'm being serious. Like if you look into the science on this stuff, it's literally garbage in a bottle. It's not like Athletic Greens or something that like is actually scientifically proven to make you better. It's just, I think they recently had some stuff come out in the news about them and whatnot, but it's like, it goes to show that like, if you can capture attention and if you have the share of mind, you can capture the share of wallet. And, oftentimes the wisdom of the crowd is not wisdom, but it's just, it's
and I was going to say, as you're talking about this, I think, for folks who listen to this and even just as I'm reflecting on what you're saying, there is this, what AI has done has accelerated things. And I was on a live stream a while back where I said, how fast is too fast?
Yeah.
Like, at what point do we reach a speed where it's like, this isn't healthy or productive? But what I've observed from this is this creates this pressure to just, you've got to nail it. You've got to have your viral moment. You got to go big fast. And what I've seen is when you actually watch things that do that, they're often not sustainable. They may get that giant influx of boom, and then they fall off a cliff. And it's that consistent putting one foot in front of the other, being authentic and being real, and just continuing to march forward. No, you're not going to blow up and become a global superstar overnight, but you're also not going to crash through the crust of the earth because somebody caught a post that you made once that was completely, and it just completely destroys everything you've built because you've been that consistent thing. And I think in some ways that can give people hope and inspiration in a time where it feels like, if I'm not just running at full sprint 24/7, hoping to catch that one needle thread, I'm doomed. And it's like, well, no, but that's what this energy kind of has you feeling like. At least that's my observation, and how sometimes even I feel that pressure to go, do I just need to be like running faster, harder all the time? And it's like,
Yeah.
I can't do it.
I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Like if you look at the law of the universe and you just like dig into first principles, which is what I try to do a lot, which is like everything compounds, right? Yeah. And it's like I'll give you a good example. I work with a lot of CEOs and business leaders, and some of the highest performing CEOs that I've worked with in, some cases Fortune 500 companies, right? Or just like high growth venture backed startups. Almost all of them have this. Well, many of them are ultra marathon runners or triathletes or tough mudders, or their ability to withstand consistent pain, whether it's physical, emotional, intellectual pain, financial pain, and keep going, is something that I think is a special trait that I never really thought about, right? It's like a lot of times that it's the ability to keep going that sets people apart from I'm sure you've heard the story, like 6 Feet from Gold, where it's like, during the gold rush, you had a bunch of people that were all chasing it. And, there's a lot of like parables and maxims and stuff about this, but like the people that like gave up and were like, yeah, I'm just gonna move on to something else. It was the person that stuck with it that ultimately, hit the gold. And
right. They eventually landed it. They eventually hit it, and everybody else had filtered out.
But then people got really mad because they're like, oh my God, I was only 6 feet from gold, right? And there's a classic, like I think it's Napoleon Hill wrote a book about this years ago. I'd have to fact check that. But the bigger point here is I think people give up a lot of times before they hit their big break. Yeah. And what I'm finding is like all the sprinters I've ever known, like take track and field as an example, right? All the sprinters I've ever known ended up with an injury at some point, right?
Yep.
All the marathon runners I know ended up with an injury at some point. But I think the difference between the marathon runner who can run sprints and the sprinter who can't run a marathon is that those who can keep going are the ones that prevail. And that's just what I've seen, is that like it's like that supernova moment, right? Where someone just completely burns out and then they never come back. Yeah. I see that a lot, like where I'll be in like a CEO mastermind group or something, and you'll see somebody break down and you'll never see that person again.
Yeah, they complete. And that's what I was saying. Like you can keep striving for this like skyrocket moment, and you're just pushing yourself. But then the number of people in my circle and sphere of influence where I've seen the gas runs out and they come crashing down and crash through the mantle of the earth, and they never come back out because they hit so hard and they weren't prepared for it. And I think that's one of the other things that I've seen with the tech boom or the AI boom is that overnight success usually doesn't end up going well because you're not prepared for what comes with it. And it can be you can learn some really hard lessons along the way. And sure, there's countless examples of people who have somehow made it, but the ones I know who have learned and adjusted, and they didn't keep doing what they were doing before. They didn't just keep like running for the flag. they readjusted.
What I would say, just to push back on that a little bit, is no overnight success did it overnight. And there's a lot of people, to your point, that like went viral or had some special moment happen or had their like 15 minutes of fame or whatever, right? Or 15 seconds of fame, as we live in this economy. But I think what's interesting is that it's the people who have been like really obsessed with a problem for a long period of time that are the ones that are, uber successful. Like everyone wants to talk about AI, and you can't talk about AI without ChatGPT and OpenAI. But Sam Altman's been a disciplined startup builder. I mean, you can go back to his essays from years ago where his mental fortitude and the way he was thinking about the world, his theories on that. I mean, OpenAI started as a research lab, right? Like, most people don't realize, like, they've been at
people
this
think this whole thing spun up at the end of 2022, and it didn't. 100%. And there's billions of dollars and blood, sweat, and tears that have gone into it, even though now we're reaping the benefits, and it's easy to look at it and go, wow, that thing just came out of nowhere, but it didn't.
Yeah. And I think it's also like hyper compression, right? So like we can talk about Moore's law and how we all know about things like Moore's law, and some would say that we beat that a while ago, but like whether it's, the chips in our pockets that can, be faster, better, cheaper, whether it's, time and the compression of time. Like, I think what's happening right now is what's possible. The more knowledge we obtain as a civilization, we can do in a faster cycle, right? So everything gets faster, better, stronger, cheaper, faster, better, stronger, cheaper over time. And ultimately, the thing I think we have to start to look at now is like, what's the thing that can't be replaced? So what I said is, like, back to your point about smashing through the mantle of the earth, is like creativity is a renewable resource, and invest in creativity and invest in long-term building, right? It's like the people that you look at in the gym, or the people that you look at on, on the runner's circuit or whatever it is, or thought leadership circuit, they're not here today, gone tomorrow, right? They've been here for a real long time before they broke through. And I think that, like, that's the thing that inspires me. So back to the point about like diapers and dumpster fires, is like, shit's going to happen. Shit's going to blow up. You have to know for that. You have to plan for that. And then you have to figure out what you're going to do about it. And that's why, instead of not getting up this morning, and going to work, and, I didn't feel like getting up this morning. I was like, like, I got a bunch of stuff on my to-do list today that I've scheduled, I kept pushing it back. And now it's on the calendar, and it's like, I just have to get this stuff done. I don't want to do it. So that's why I snuck in this time with you today. Cause I'm like, all right, everything before talking to you and everything after talking to you today, I don't want to do it truthfully, but
well, I'm glad I'm able to be that surge of reprieve in between.
No, you're 100% the surge of reprieve, but it's like, but it's got to get done. Right. And I think that what I'm finding right now is the people who put off today until tomorrow are the ones that never get to tomorrow in the way that they want.
Because then tomorrow comes, and there's something that pushes it to the next day. And then I think the thing that I would add to that is, I do think there's room to sometimes say, today I'm not going to get out of bed. And I think that's where it is okay. There are days where, it's like, I don't want to do today. But I think what is different in kind of articulating what you said is, it's about being intentionally conscious about that, and also knowing that that's just today. I need that today, but that's not a perpetual, I'm waiting until it gets better. Cause it's like, well, it's never going to get better.
Yeah.
You're going to need to lean in to make it better, but also being willing to accept that, there are times that you need to step back and go, I need to take a breath. I need to strategically reset. I had to do that even for myself. For folks who've been following me for a while, I had a couple people be like, "Wait, what happened to your website?" And I'm like, I killed it because Learning Sharks is dead. Baby Shark is at the bottom of the deep now. Like, I took him out. It's because it wasn't right. It wasn't the right direction. And so I needed to take a strategic pause. And sometimes you need to do that, but it has to be with the end in mind. And I think that's one of the things of like, where is that next step that you're planning on taking?
Yeah, I love that. And I agree.
We don't have to agree. You can disagree.
No, I agree with that. But since we're being really raw here, let me share something with you in the audience that like
Sure.
really pisses me off, which is I feel like a lot of people make excuses and then blame it on other people. So
Yes.
like for example, I had a conversation with a young entrepreneur recently who kept trying to get on my calendar, and I instructed my assistant to not prioritize it because it wasn't a good use of my time. And the reason why is I had already given him some time generously. I didn't charge him for any of it. And I asked him a couple questions about what he wanted to achieve, and we went through it and we aligned on what he needed to do to get that success. And then he didn't do the things that we both agreed that he agreed, his words, not mine, that he needed to do. And then he wanted to get more time with me. And, again, it was just trying to be helpful, always trying to help young entrepreneurs because I didn't get a lot of help when I was a young entrepreneur. So I try to give back wherever I can. And I just sent a very simple email. I was like, did you do the stuff we talked about?
Yeah.
And, he wrote back this like long-winded response. Thankfully for my AI, it summarized it. And the answer was no. And,
a long answer to say, no, I didn't do any of the things that
I'm dead serious.
mutually agreed to as important next steps.
So then I said, do me a favor, send me a screenshot of your calendar. And he sent me a screenshot of his calendar. And I, on my phone, like scribbled over a couple of things. And I was like, what's all this? And what I think happens a lot is a lot of people get drunk on self-help books. And if you look at the stats, like the number one section in a bookstore that has the most traffic, that has the most sales is the self-help section. And it's because what happens is we want to read about the fad diet. We want to read about the next greatest thing, the next big breakthrough that's going to close all the deals and solve all the problems. We read that, we consume that, we're all inspired by it, right? We're all pumped up by it. We get high off that supply. And then what happens? Do we put any of that knowledge to work, or do we just go on to the next book? And I think that what bothers me is when people make a public declaration to themselves and the universe on where they're going, and then they cry and they complain and they blame others when they don't get there. And the reality is the only person that they have to blame is themselves. And I think it's hard to say that because there's been a lot of times where, to your point about like stepping off the, whether it's hamster wheel or treadmill or, hard mountain, whatever metaphor you want to use. I find that a lot of times when people take that break, one day or 1 week or 1 month isn't enough to get back on and keep going. And I think that the challenge is like, I'm all about self-care, right? I meditate every day. I really prioritize sleep now because I was stupid in my 20s and 30s and never used to prioritize it. And that is the most stupidest thinking you can ever have, which is like, let me sleep less and I'm going to be a better leader. Like I was that asshole for about 20 years. And
I get up at 4 a.m. and then I go to bed at 2. It's not.
I work 22-hour days, and the other 2 days I spend learning more to work. It's like, no, you're an idiot. Like, do you not know how the bio machine that is a human works? But I was that asshole for 20 years thinking that I could just, have another cup of coffee or Red Bull and keep going. But so it's comical now to look back at my stupidity, and I'm making fun of myself, not anybody else.
Yeah.
But I get back, and what's my point here? My point is that if you want something to happen, you got to do the work to make it happen. And look, it's totally okay if you don't want something to happen, right? Some of my happiest friends that I have live in a cabin in the woods and, work 10 hours a week, and they have exactly what they need and want to be happy. And they spend their time exactly how they want to spend their time, right?
Yeah.
I have a different goal in life, right? Like I have a mission that I'm trying to solve with creativity and curiosity, not for myself, but for other people. I can't do that from, sitting on a yoga pillow
with no internet connection out in the sticks.
I can't do that in the woods and just meditating for 20 hours a day. That's my fact,
No. Well, and what's interesting is I haven't published it. It's still on my desk, but I have, it's interesting you bring this up because literally my post that I wrote while I was doing the elliptical this morning about this is about like, quit blaming your tech stack, your lack of resources, your account. Like those are not the reason you're not achieving what you want to achieve. Quit pointing the finger at these things and look in the mirror and go, what could I be doing differently. And I think the big difference is, and this is what I wrote my book about, is it's about that intentionality
Totally.
of, again, being consciously choosing that. If you're going to say, I need to step off the whatever for a day, it's a conscious choice of, I'm doing that for this purpose, for this length, so that it puts me in a better position to do this thing that is what charts me forward. And I think that is really kind of the bridge between what we're both saying, which is you can get trapped in that cycle of, like you said, the self-help cycle. I just need to take a day for myself. And that day turns into a week, and it turns into a month, and it turns into 3 months. And pretty soon it's like, okay, but at some point you've got to get back up and say, what am I going to do about this? And where is this going? Knowing that, you know what, you might step on a lily pad that takes you to the bottom of the lake. You will. It's not you might. It will at some point happen. The floor is going to fall out from under you. Okay, that sucks.
Yeah.
And then what?
Yeah. And then what is great, and what I would say is, you are not good enough. That's something that I think we have to admit to ourselves, is like, there's so many Instagram posts out there like, you're good enough, you're good enough, you're good enough. And listen, I'm all about positive affirmations and positive self-talk and that sort of thing. But here's the thing. If you're trying to be a specific coder and solve some engineering problem, maybe you're not good enough. Maybe you have to look at the problem differently. Maybe you have to change. Maybe that's not important to you, right? Maybe you're not going to put the reps in. If you can't afford to hire someone to do that, to solve that problem for you or with you, right? If you can't afford to build the team that you need to take your vision to the next level, then it's on you. And you either got to adjust the goalpost or you got to adjust the effort, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, I think what the hardest pill to swallow is for most people is, you are not good enough. And it's like, that's the thing, is like, yeah, I wanted to bench 400 pounds by the time I was 40 years old, right? And I almost got to it, right? Like I got to like 365, right? And I felt super awesome. It was and I'm making fun of myself a little bit.
No, but I get
it's
it.
a personal fitness goal, right? But if you ask me about, was I weighing all my food? Was I checking my macros every single day? Was I doing this? And I'm purposely making a non-business reference, right? I wasn't. So I wasn't good enough to do that, because the goal that I set for myself, I didn't do what needed to happen to do that. And I did that a lot in my businesses, right? Which is where it's like, okay, I've got this service business or this product business or whatever. And it's like, I wasn't a good enough leader to be able to set a clear enough vision for my team. Don't blame, like I used to be like, oh, I can't get the right person on my team, or, I can't attract enough talent. It's like, well, pay better, buy better, make better hiring decisions, be a better leader,
be a better leader,
be a better leader, be more clear in your thinking. But I would get so frustrated. And, again, I'm referring to myself in my 20s and 30s. And I get so frustrated because, why isn't this thing happening? And wham. And it's like, you're just not good enough. Like, so work harder and elevate this skill, whether it's your leadership or your hard skills or your soft skills. And I think that that's a message that we don't say enough, because we're all trying to like we're trying to just digest rainbows and sunshine every single day. And I think that's the
tell
problem.
everybody that if you just keep doing what you're doing, eventually everything will be wonderful and you'll achieve all your wildest dreams. And it's not reality.
Yeah. And it's like, so this idea that like you are enough, like I love the idea. And I love the spiritual significance of it.
But it'll leave you hungry at the end.
It will leave you hungry at the end. 100%.
And I think, and it goes back to, and I think this is where, on the polar extreme, you can swing the other way, and that's not healthy, because again, it's about the conscious choices and the intentionality. So like for you, the goal of, and I actually, it's so funny we're having this conversation. I had similar, like these fitness goals where I'm like, I want to do this and I want to get to this point. And then I realized I actually don't think I care as much about it as I think in my head, because if I did, I would actually be more committed to doing these other things. Because I know cognitively, if I really want to deadlift this, then I need to do this and I need to do this and I need to do that. You know what? I guess I don't really care that much about it. And that doesn't mean, oh, well, then I guess I got to throw away lifting weights. No, It just means that goal changed, because the intentionality, when I actually asked myself, why do you actually want to deadlift that much weight? I'm like, well, I don't know, I set some arbitrary number in my head that I thought would somehow make me happy. And then the more I thought about it, the more I went, you know what? You would get to that number anyway.
Yeah.
And then it'd be the next number. And you'd go, well, now I'm not quite there type of a thing.
In
And
my
so,
case, it was my fucking ego, right? It was like, why do I want to do this thing? Because society or somebody I follow on Instagram or social media was able to do this, and I felt that I should be able to do this. And it's like, you know, it's hilarious. The other day I was talking to somebody, and it's like, I don't have a dad bod. I have a father figure, and it was like I was like laughing at myself, right? And it's like, yes, I would love to have 6-pack abs, right? Why? Because who doesn't want to show off 6-pack abs? Like, it's the coolest thing that Hollywood has made us care about. But
like the whole world has told us as a guy your whole life that is like the apex of health, is like, look what happens when I lift up my shirt.
Yeah. And then when the cheese plate comes out at the party and I'm the gavone that just devours the cheese plate, it's like, Pete, maybe if you want that thing to happen, you shouldn't devour that cheese plate every time it shows up, or you shouldn't do all these particular things that are in direct opposition of what you want to seek. And I make these examples because I think they're all relatable for people, but I see it with business too, right? Which is like, I'll give you a perfect example. I do a lot of angel investing, and I have companies come to me all the time. We do pitch competitions, the whole thing. And the amount of times in the past 6 months, people have pitched me an AI concept, which is basically just, you know, empty ideas that are not solving real problems, that are basically just API calls to ChatGPT, right? It's like that little Scooby-Doo meme where you like lifts off the hat. It's like, I'm an AI startup that's democratizing blah, blah. And it's like, no, you're a single API call to ChatGPT. But what's funny is, like, I'm not making fun of these people, but like what I am saying is, like, when you dig into it and you ask a question, is like, well, what real problem are you solving? I get it. You're trying to say something shiny and novel, and the next cool technology will be there. But like, what's the real human problem that you solve?
Yep.
And when you can actually do that, it doesn't matter if it's built with chewing gum and silly string, or if it's built with the most technological breakthrough on the planet. What matters is, do you solve a person's problem? Do they think it's valuable, and will they pay for it? Yeah. And if you can get that, yes, and you can spin that flywheel a lot of times, now you have what all the startup darlings call product market fit.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if that's the ATM machine in the bodega that only accepts cash down the block from your house, or if that's the guy who spends 20 hours a week scanning receipts in at the dry cleaners, right? Very boring problems, but these are things that people would pay for. And I think that a lot of times people kind of give up because they're like, oh, well, there's all these other technologies that already do that. And it's like, yes, but are your end buyers aware that that tool exists in the first place?
Yeah. Yeah. And is it actually solving their problem? Like, be the person who knows. And this goes back to what I was saying. I mean, the title of my book is Relentless Intention. And it's about this, the number of times, especially I dealt with this and still deal with this in corporate learning all the time, where we've got a problem. Let's train our way out of it. If we just educate people enough, then the problem will go away. And digging back to this, but why is that a problem in the first place? Yeah. Like, really understanding, like, why is that a problem? And what do you think solving it is going to change? And even when I've coached or mentored people over the years, where it's like, I want to get to this job level, or I want to get this job or make this much money. It's like, why? Like, what do you really think that is going to bring to you? Because if that is built on shifting sand, you will find yourself perpetually standing, and then the floor falls out from under you. And then you leap over to this side, and then the floor washes out from under, because you don't really know what you're doing in the first place. And I think that's one of those things where you're setting yourself up for failure if you haven't taken the time to really deeply understand, like, what am I even really doing with this?
Yeah. One of the hardest lessons that I came across in my career, and I've built a lot of businesses. I've gone on to, build, invest, and support a lot of awesome companies, and I'm super proud of that. But I think all of us have a chip on our shoulder from when we're a kid. And I think if you figure out what that chip on your shoulder is, like when I was a kid, I don't even remember who said it to me. It was a teacher So I had ADHD growing up. I didn't
Okay.
know I had it, right? Because I tested for it when I was 17. So like it would have been great to figure that out when I was 7, right?
Yeah.
But
No sooner.
you know, all it meant for me, again, nowadays we have words for that, right? But like what would have been helpful for me to understand is that I'm a visual kinesthetic learner, and that auditory and linear based learning modalities don't work for me. Right. It would have been great if I knew that at 8 years old. I would have loved school. I would have loved math. I would have crushed that shit. Right. Now I'm like taking math classes at like 40 because I'm like realizing that math is the law of the universe. Right. Like I watched that Oppenheimer movie and I'm like, oh, I wish I had that like badass theoretical physics brain. Right. But like, not to get on a tangent, but I say that because what's super interesting is someone told me that I was stupid as a kid. Someone made me feel stupid. So then I spent all this time trying to always have the answers. And I spent all these time trying to prove people wrong and prove people I'm smart. Look at me, look at me, look at me. That ego, that craving for validation. When the reality is the businesses that I worked at that I was the most successful, they all had two things in common. One is I relentlessly stayed with the problem and I kept working on it. And I didn't just jump to the next shiny object. That was one thing. The other thing it had in common was I didn't try to solve the problem in the first go, right? I used to think, oh, I have to have all the answers. What I've realized now is the smartest people, the most successful people are the ones that have the questions, not the answers. Because the more you can spend time with the problem, figuring out what it is that you're really truly solving, the more you can move past like the novel, shiny stuff that's at the top of the surface and get really to the bottom of the iceberg. Like, what's the thing that's at the root cause of it? You know, in my world, we call it 5 whys analysis or root cause decision trees. And there's all kinds of fancy buzzwords.
We always have to systematize everything. We can't ever just get to the bottom of the root. What's going on? It's like, no, we got to have a fishbone diagram to get there.
100%. We do, because when we have a model of something, people feel like we're smarter, right? Because we can explain something and with jargon and that sort of thing. But I really think that that's the root of all of it here is like, what problem are you solving? And I think that when we look at our careers or we look at our companies or we look at our teams that we're managing and leading, it's like, what's the real problem that we're solving? And can we strip past the sort of veneer of sexy and shiny and really get to the root of it? And I'll be really honest, like when I've done that successfully, probably 10% of the time or 20% of the time, if you want to do Pareto 80-20, like when I've done that successfully, right? Back to models, just making fun of myself again.
Yeah, we have to.
You have to, right? Then I've cracked it. But when I've had the answer right away where someone's like, oh, like, how do we solve this problem? And you just answer it versus like going deeper. Surface level analysis leads to surface level success.
Yeah.
Deep level analysis leads to deep level success. So the question you have to ask yourself is like, do I want to solve the surface level problem or do I want to solve the deeper problem? And I think the people who pursue the deeper problems, they realize that you're not going to get that in the 15 and 30 second Instagram videos and TikTok videos. You got to go deeper and you got to go past the headline and actually read the library. And that's sort of my, like, that's 20 years of my epic mistakes boiled into 30 seconds for the audience here. Because when I've gotten over my shit, you know, which is like, who cares if someone thinks I'm stupid? You know, at the end of the day,
who cares?
Who cares? Like, okay, cool. You think I'm smart? Is that going to pay my rent this month? Or like, you think I'm stupid? Is that going to pay my rent this month? Like, or, well, you think I'm stupid, but you know what? There's a lot of other people that are paying me because they think I'm smart. Like, and that ego shit, I think, is just really kind of gets us twisted. I'll be really frank. It does. And
it does.
And that's the dumpster fire, is that I think we're all chasing something right now. And we feel like we got gypped, right? Whether it was, you know, COVID robbed my life or increased mortgage rates are robbing my ability to have my white
cost of groceries is the reason I'm where I am, type of a thing.
Yeah. But yeah, if you look at like the happiest people in the world, right? It's the people in Bhutan that, you know, again, there's books like Blue Zones and, you know, lots of really smart books. And it's like people that have a sense of meaningful relationships and community and connection. Those are the ones that are happiest, not the people with the highest net worth, not the people with the Bugatti or all the fancy material things. It's like truly the people who have a sense of purpose and community in their life are the happiest. And I know that, and I've read those books, and I say to myself, well, then why am I wasting all my
Not
time and energy
doing this.
figuring out
Yeah.
the next update for my Tesla? It's like, it's like, dude, just like focus on what matters, And it's
Yeah.
funny because I'm making fun of myself in the process and realizing, you know what, like the answers are there if we just start asking the questions. And
Yeah.
that's where I think we can go from like dumpsters and dumpster fires to diapers and realize that what is the purpose of a dumpster? It's to store trash. What is the purpose of a diaper? It's to catch shit. And when we move past that, we can sort of like get rid of all the lore that's attached to it, which is like, it's a diaper. It needs to be changed. One day you won't need diapers anymore.
Right.
Like it's a dumpster, and take out the trash. And one day, hopefully we'll have some closed loop sustainable thing that can, reduce the footprint of trash and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting place to start and kind of conclude, right?
Well, and I think going back to that, and again, I appreciate this conversation and just the vulnerability behind it, because I think that's where a lot of people are right now, myself included in that, where it's just really easy to be stuck in that cycle and asking those questions and it's so hard sometimes to look in the mirror and to acknowledge some of that stuff and go, geez, what am I really doing? Like, let me actually ask why I'm actually really miserable with this. Is it maybe because I'm chasing something that really I'm never going to get there, because really it's vapor anyway. So once I get there and try and grab it, it's going to blow away anyway. And so part of my frustration. I'm chasing after something that actually isn't going to satisfy once I get there. And I think taking the time to do that, even though it's much easier to just distract yourself with creating a new GPT and standing up another business and throwing something else out. And maybe if I just keep myself distracted with social media and all these other things, then maybe I won't have to deal with it. But it's just sitting in the back seat, lingering the whole time. And eventually it's coming for you. And I think that's where, if anything, now's the time to take that reflective look in the mirror and figure out, well, what are you going to do?
Amen.
Well, Pete, I have so appreciated this. And again, it was so fun backstage going, you just want to talk about this and see where it goes and hope that, if anything, what's the goal of this? To be vulnerable with people who listen and watch this, hopefully make people go, you know what, I can relate to that, but also encourage and inspire people to go, but yet, so do something about it. Take that next step, get creative, and figure out what it is you're trying to do, because there is a path forward. And you don't want to find yourself 6 feet from gold. I love that.
Amen.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for watching, listening. I hope you get something out of it. And we will see you. Well, you won't see me next week. Well, I might push one of my other episodes and hold. I'm off for Thanksgiving. I'm taking a reset week next week. So we will see you all later. Thanks again, Pete. And we will see you on the other side.